6, a helping hand with your land.
Neil from Essex here to show you the new Kubota RTV 520, the upgrade to the older RTV 500. Going to walk you around this machine and show you some of the improvements that Kubota has made, explain to you a couple of ways that this machine is a little bit different than most of the other utility vehicles that you'll find on the market. The original RTV 500, the unit that this machine is replacing, is one of the longest running models in Kubota's product line. That thing was introduced back in 2009 and was a current production model for 11 years, up until 2020. This year though, in 2021, this machine is getting a refresh in a couple of areas. It's not a dramatically different machine. That thing stayed in production for so long because it was really well accepted, but there's a couple of improvements that have been made here over the last 11 years that are worth looking at. Majority of those are going to be in terms of styling. Over the course of all of those years, our expectation for the appearance of these things has changed a little bit, and improvements have been made in that regard. So you'll notice the front end of this looks a little bit more mean, a little bit more aggressive than what the older models did. There's some changes to the coloring of it, some more two-tone areas and that kind of stuff. Just give it a sharper, more modern looking appearance. Mechanically though, there's one important place this did change, and over the course of all of those years, Kubota released a new series engine that's under the hood of this. Now this is a legitimate Kubota gas engine. It's not something that's come out from China or from Subaru or somebody else. It is a Kubota engine that's back under the hood, electronically fuel injected and water cooled, and picks up about 1.5 horsepower over top of its predecessor. So it is a little bit more powerful by about 10% or so. You'll see here in the driving demos that we do a little bit later, I feel this machine feels a lot more peppy than that 10% would lead you on to believe. So in terms of driving experience, I feel like there's a significant upgrade here, more than that 1.5 horsepower really lets on. Now what really makes these things unique in the marketplace is what's underneath the bed in the back. Kubota is really the only manufacturer in the industry right now that continues to have a product line full of hydrostatic transmission to utility vehicles. And that basically is taking Kubota's tractor technology and tractor knowledge and how to engineer these transmissions and pulling that stuff down into utility vehicles. This machine is no exception. It is a small machine, but it still sports a hydrostatic transmission. It's going to have two ranges, a low and a high in reverse, up on the dash that you can shift between. And as you step it down on the pedal to go, it will drive much like a tractor does. It's not quick off the line. It's not ever going to spin those rear tires, but you'll feel the thing move and start kind of shooting along. Now the cool thing is about these things is when you're going downhill, CVT transmissions with their belt drives tend to open up as they go downhill and freewheel down hills, where hydrostatic transmissions like you'd have on a tractor don't do that. As you go down hills, they tend to load up. The transmission will fight the machine as it goes down the hill, and it kind of keeps you going down hills in a more safe and controlled manner than a CVT does. So that is one of the major selling features for this. Kubota's information that they supply to us has been pretty light on the changes to this machine, and when I look around, I visually see more changes than what they seem to be letting on in the marketing materials. To my eye here, I see probably some changes to suspension geometry and a little bit of stuff happening on the transmission here, and I feel like the driving experience on this machine is a lot different than the old one is, and I don't necessarily have the information from the manufacturers in this regard to be able to say XYZ parts were changed out. But in my time of running this thing around and climbing hills and kind of shooting around our yard here, I could say the ride feels better, and the performance of the thing, both in terms of acceleration and in pulling hills, I feel like is greatly improved. And so we'll take a quick spin around here and show you a little bit of what this thing looks like on those hillsides. On a small utility vehicle, you get a small little cargo bed in the back. Now this thing's not huge, right? The bigger machines are going to be large enough to slide skids and stuff into the back of. This one's not quite that large, right? Not for working with the same kind of capacities that the larger RTVs are capable of. It is, however, a slick little thing, right? It's got diamond plate in the bottom. It's a really solid tailgate, nice, you know, cable ends and stuff to hold this down if you choose to sit in the back of it. Somebody would probably tell you not to do that. The latches to release it are just two little latches on either side, and then it pivots right here in the middle. So if you're trying to dump a load, you're not lifting the whole weight. It's going to pivot and be easy to dump back. There are generally aftermarket lift kits available for these kinds of things if you'd like to have this thing dump itself. I'm not sure why you necessarily would. The pivot of that is pretty easy to do, and I don't know that it's necessarily worth the money for that kind of thing. Capacity-wise, they're gonna rate this up to having 440 pounds here in the back of the bed. So really, again, easy to dump if you need to. There are a handful of options you can go back in here, things like mats and stuff to go in the bottom to kind of protect that bottom surface. If you're gonna be throwing metal things and stuff in the back, it would keep this from getting banged up. All right, so we're gonna take a quick spin here on the RTV 520. See how this handles compared to the old model. So we're gonna go out and put it into high range, take our parking brake off and take a quick cruise around the parking lot. Now it's important to understand what this machine is and what it isn't, right? This is not something that's gonna go out and blast around. It's not a super high power machine, something for getting around your property, taking care of your gardens around your house, that kind of thing, going out to check the cows maybe. It's not something that you want to go out and necessarily think that you're going to go blast around in, right? There's other machines that are going to do that faster. Things like Kubota's Sidekick, right? At 50 horsepower is going to travel a lot faster than this thing does. The majority of the appeal of this is going to be its size. So it's a fairly small footprint. You can see here when we're driving around, it's really quiet. Run it up to full speed here. That's it. This little electronic fuel injected engine doesn't make a whole lot of noise even when you've got it stomped the whole way down. That's different than some other engines that you'll find in machines like this, particularly the ones with CVT transmissions, are gonna rev really high. They need those revs to perform properly. This hydrostatic works a little bit differently than that. So you get that fact of the machine holding itself back when you go down hills, which is a big plus for these things. But also the fact that in order for this transmission to operate, it's relying more on torque than it is on high revs in order to spin a CVT. So it's quiet, right? I mean, I could have a conversation with the person sitting beside me without shouting at them, which is something that you often can't say about this kind of thing. I'm gonna swing over here to my hillside. So the one really unique factor here of Kubota's RTVs is the hydrostatic transmission, right? With the exception of the RTV 400 and the Sidekick, they all have this little hydrostat in the rear end. So you have this kind of tractor DNA in these things, as opposed to being kind of based on a four-wheeler with that CVT golf cart transmission, right? There's a place for that CVT. They do feel snappier off the line than what these hydros do, but this holdback here is cool. So while I go down this hill, you can hear there as I went down the restriction from that transmission holding me back, right? A CVT is gonna open up and freewheel down that hill, while this thing you could hear was fighting as I was going down. Now, I could be completely wrong about this. Kubota made no mention of this in any of the stuff that's provided to dealers for new models. I feel like there's some other tuning differences between the engine and transmission here. I don't have another RTV 500 to drive side by side with. This feels more peppy to me than the extra 1.5 horsepower that the engine picked up. I kind of question a little bit if some work was done in engine transmission matching like what had happened back in the RTVX. But when I go from, say, a standstill like this and step on the gas, it doesn't move right away. I have a little bit of revs pick up before the transmission starts to go. And that gives a much greater sense of acceleration. These things have a little bit of a reputation for being a little doggy. And the hydrostatic's like that, right? Because it's got essentially this tractor's transmission, right? It's made to work, not to fly. But this feels better to me. I could be all wet on that, again, because I don't have the old model to jump back and forth between, but when I step on it there, it feels quicker. It feels quicker than its, whatever, 17.5 horsepower would suggest to me, right? I own a 50 horsepower machine, and this is not that. But to me, this is, we're getting out what this machine is made for. The performance feels better to me, and it feels very acceptable, right? And it doesn't necessarily need those gobs of horsepower because it's a much smaller machine, right? The platform isn't nearly as big, there's not as much bed capacity, the suspension's lighter. But even here in high range, like I'm pulling up hills and stuff in high range, frankly better than an RTV 900 does, with a diesel engine and more horsepower. So I'd say performance-wise, I'm fairly impressed. Again, I'm a little spoiled by the bigger machines. This does not have the electronic or hydraulic power steering that the other machines do. The steering does feel heavier. By no means, though, is it stiff, right? I mean, it's not, moving along, I can steer with one finger. I'm pushing on the steering wheel, but I would struggle to find much to complain about here. All right, so we're gonna go try some low range, where I get a little more torque in the rear end. Okay, so I would say low range, pulling and that's it, right? I'm going really slow and I have my revs basically the whole way up at this point. And we're like in a bigger RTV or my sidekick, low range, I can throw the rear end out and spin it around. You're not gonna do that in this. You just don't. Definitely have the sense that this thing could pull a ton. Like if you're gonna pull a trailer around or something, that low range is great. But for other than that, I don't know why you would ever use it. For basic transport here, even me going up hills and that kind of stuff, high range is perfectly adequate. I don't run out of power or anything like that. I don't dog out like the heavier RTVs can. You're not gonna climb a mountainside in high. But for simple getting around, I've got no issue. To me, when sometimes you see golf carts selling for like $7,000 and $8,000, seems silly when you look into this space and the kind of machine that you can buy for just nominally more money. Four-wheel drive and much heavier and more power. I don't know why, if transportation is your need, the incremental money that you spend to get something like this is a no-brainer to me. So my camera guy here is standing on top of our dirt pile that we use for testing equipment. I'm sitting down here at the bottom. I've got the machine in high range. Now, generally, when you're gonna go pull steep hills like this, usually the recommendation for all of the other hydrostats is to stay in low because you need that low end torque to be able to pull significant hills. And this is significant. This is not any kind of hill that you're gonna encounter, you know, at least running around our hilly lot here in PA, right? If this is more like mountainside type slope, I'd have a hard time giving a degrees to it or anything like that, but it's significant. If I go here and just take the machine from high range and stomp on it, I power the whole way up. And that is not something that I'm usually used to in these kinds of machines with hydrostats, right? We usually will caution people about this kind of thing when pulling hillsides like this because it's a place they tend not to perform so well, but this to me feels better. We'll do the same thing going downhill here. So I'm gonna go in high range and run back down the hill again with my foot off the gas, or off the brake rather. And you can see here, I definitely pick up speed as I'm coming down, but I don't take off and run nearly as fast as I would. And if you listen through my mic there, you can probably hear a little bit of the transmission fighting back. So now we're gonna repeat our test here in low range. So I mean, it didn't hesitate at all there. And honestly, I almost feel better about doing it in high just because I definitely had more acceleration. And going back down again, see how slow I'm going? And I can sit and audibly kind of hear the hiss of the hydrostat as I go down. And you can't see it, my foot's not on the brake. My tires are almost there starting to slide a little bit. And that's that really controlled manner that we like these things for if you're working on hillsides, particularly if you have loads and stuff behind you and say more weight in the back of the bed. That's really handy. It gives you a good comfort level when you're working on these things. Back in high again. It's good. So like I said, This kind of scenario right here, if you start looking on the internet about information about Kubota's utility vehicles, this kind of hill performance like here is usually where most of the concerns are found. And while the marketing literature for this doesn't point out that they made any kind of significant improvements, my butt in the seat says otherwise. I feel like it's better. I feel like it's peppier. I feel like it climbs better. And really, to me, I'd have a hard time finding any objections to how this machine climbs hills now. So I'm going to call it an improvement in my book, even though Kubota doesn't seem to be calling that out. All told, I'm coming away with a surprisingly positive impression of this today. For a machine that's been around here for over 10 years, we've always thought highly of these. But I feel like a lot has improved here, and again, more than I think Kubota was letting on. I really wish I had the old model here to go and set side by side and look, because I feel like there's several things that just look different to me here, the way the suspension is done and that kind of stuff that just weren't called out. And I could be completely wrong on this, but my butt in the seat running this around makes this feel to me like a much bigger update and a much bigger upgrade than what I was really expecting. If you look at the market, this is a machine that you're going to buy under $10,000. List price, and even discounted at a dealer, you're going to get it down below that. If you look and say what a machine that's generally just kind of a go-around type machine, like you get a golf cart or something like that, right? You could spend $7,000, $8,000 in order to buy some kind of small golf cart, and the capacities and capabilities that you get by spending just a little bit more money to upgrade into something like this, I feel are really money well spent. It gets into a class of machine that's very capable and isn't just something that's going to get you around. It obviously is going to pull and push if you want to put a snow plow on the front, climb hills with ease, and it is really capable of working. And that work angle is kind of what Kubota has always been about in the utility vehicle space, right? Machines that are tractor technology that can push and pull and have those hydrostatic transmissions that allow them to do that kind of work in the way that CVT-based machines can't quite do in just the same way. That comes from an owner of a CVT-based machine. So yeah, if you have questions about this machine or parts or service needs for equipment you've already got, give us a call at Messick's. We're available at 800-222-3373 or online at messicks.com. This thing you could hear was fighting as I was going down. I ran it out of gas. Oh, bugger. Well, next video, what do you do when you run your RTV out of gas?